This weapon is the 9x21, and these rounds are 9x19 Luger, also known as Parabellum. Is it possible to use 9x19 in a 9x21? The answer at first glance might seem very simple, because yes, it is physically possible to do this. However, I strongly advise against it, and I want to explain why. Lately, a lot of people have been wondering about the issue of using a 9x19 cartridge in a 9x21 firearm. In fact, many people have been thinking this way after 9x19 became legal. Well, I'll get a 9x21 firearm because even if one day 9x21 ammo runs out, I can still use the 9x19. The fact that something physically fits inside your firearm is not a sufficient justification. You might say, but Vlad Sparastoria, you fired 5 rounds and the gun didn't explode? Yes, but the issues are a bit more complicated than that and concern more the wear of the firearm than the failure of the firearm itself. Whether you fire 1 or 5 rounds, after all, the fact that it physically fits inside is not a real justification, because even the 50 BMG physically fits inside the chamber of a 12 gauge. If, for example, for this reason, kerosene could go into the gas tank of your gasoline car, or bleach could go into your stomach, that doesn't mean these things are made to take that kind of thing. And if, at least in the case of the 9x19 inside a 9x21, this doesn't lead to catastrophic results. Also because the two cartridges are very similar, and for example, they have characteristics like the exact same maximum pressure. It's not very good for firearms. And if you want your firearm to last and give you satisfaction for many years, we should generally use the ammunition that the manufacturer of the firearm tells us to use. In the case of the 9x21, well, the 9x21, and if between the 9x19 and the 9x21 there seem to be only 2 small millimeters of difference in case length, even if the overall length of the cartridge is the same, those millimeters in the ammunition actually make a huge difference for many small technical things to explain what kind of damage your weapon could suffer in the long run. We need to introduce a very important concept that actually helps us understand, or rather helps us figure out when certain rounds can be interchangeable. And that's the concept of headspace, known in Italian as spazio di testa. The concept of headspace is a purely technical concept. It concerns the dimensions of the cartridge and especially the chamber inside the barrel itself. These dimensions, along with other physical characteristics, are regulated, at least in Italy and the other member countries, by a European organization called CIP. And the CIP tables describe very well the dimensions that the chambers and cases of the 9x19 and 9x21 must have. Now, we all know that during loading, when inserting the cartridge into the barrel, this cartridge at a certain point stops. Obviously, if we think about it, it has to stop. But at what depth does it stop? Well, that's where all the difference lies. It's very easy to understand this concept if we try to insert a 9x21, this 9x21, into a barrel for a 9x19 weapon. Since there is a 2mm step that is too short to accommodate a shorter case, the cartridge will not fit properly. And a 9x19, of course, cannot fit into a 9x21. Precisely because inside the chamber there is this step, but this same step in a 9x21 barrel is not reached by the case of a 9x19 cartridge. Now let's use my lousy drawings for a moment. But in a proper chamber, so a 9x21 cartridge in a 9x21 chamber, the case will reach exactly where there is a ledge in the chamber, a ledge that exists precisely to support that cartridge there, so that it seats at the correct depth exactly. If instead we insert a 9x19, which you can see up here, which is shorter, into a 9x21 chamber, there will be a space where the case does not rest on this step. And you might say, Vlad Sparastoria, what difference does it make? It makes a huge difference at the moment of firing, in fact. That's what gives the necessary resistance to prevent breakage. When we have to push a bullet down the barrel with very high pressures, the truly resistant parts are the barrel and the bolt, typically also because they are made of steel. But what blocks the gas leaks is the cartridge case. Cartridge cases are made of a soft material, relatively soft, like brass, which can deform under high pressures. to fill in spaces and imperfections that will inevitably be present in the barrel, and in this way complete the sealing. However, the other part of the cartridge case must rest against the steel of the barrel or the bolt. And here we start to understand that if it doesn't rest, but it's designed to rest, there are problems. Another element, in fact, that controls the insertion, actually in both directions, of the cartridge, so also the extraction of the cartridge itself. It's the extractor, that small metal tooth found on the bolts. Like the extractor. Right now I only have a bolt, it still holds this cartridge. But what happens when I insert a cartridge case that's too short into a chamber that's too big? Here, what keeps the correct closing depth for the cartridge is no longer the shoulder inside the barrel where the case can expand and complete the sealing. It's just the extractor. Okay, it's a bit more complicated than that, so don't start writing all the technical comments to me. Just the extractor, because clearly on the walls of the chamber there are still the walls of the chamber. But if the case is just a bit too free to expand in one direction every time I shoot, actually imagine that the case wants to expand and has space to do so forward, it pulls the extractor. In the long run, this can cause the extractor itself to break, and without a working extractor, the weapon might still fire, but it definitely won't cycle properly. The space that we also leave, space that should be occupied by the case to seal the gases. Do you know what gas leaks cause? The gas that is pushed into that small 2 mm area in front of the step of the chamber, which after many shots can cause a lot of erosion. We're talking about extremely high pressures. It doesn't even make sense to measure them in atmospheres. It's almost inconceivable to compare these pressures inside firearms to atmospheric pressure. You know, these things can eventually damage even the hardest steel, just like rain can carve into rock. This imperfect fit of the cartridge in the chamber could cause other problems besides wear, such as malfunctions. And depending also on the chamber and the cartridge, loss of accuracy. Honestly, it seems like a rather silly topic to us. If I run out of this ammo, if there's a zombie apocalypse, can I use my 9x21 weapon to shoot 9x19 rounds? The problem is that this reasoning can literally be applied to everything. Why don't you have a rubber dinghy at home? You never know. The sea could rise overnight and a flood could come. You should have a rubber dinghy at home. Why isn't your car set up to use every type of fuel? If you run out of diesel, you could use gasoline and vice versa. Why don't you do that? Isn't it better to have an engine that uses 2 types of fuel? Weapons, despite the fact that they are objects created to, well, kill, let's be honest, are actually more delicate objects than we like to think. And feeding your weapon with the wrong ammunition will never be good in the long run, even if, as you can see, it works. There haven't been any problems so far. You might say, Vlad spara storia, but how do you ruin this weapon? This weapon was given to me by a friend of the channel. For literally. So, science is a weapon that actually doesn't do anything, economically speaking, sacrificed for science, for this and other future experiments. If, honestly, you want to satisfy your curiosity by shooting a 9x19 and a 9x21, who am I to stop you? Would I advise against it? It's a bit like putting gasoline in a diesel engine to see what happens. Let's avoid it. There are actually firearms in certain calibers that can safely use other ammunition. The most famous case of all, probably, is that of the .357 Magnum and the .38 Special. However, what's very important is that those 2 cartridges have the same headspace. So by their characteristics, they're much more similar in some ways than the 9x19 and the 9x21. In short, if you want to be safe, use the appropriate ammunition for your firearm. Don't try to do anything strange. And have you ever tried this? Tell me in the comments. Let me know. I've heard many people in the past tell me they've done it and didn't have any problems. And I've heard just as many people tell me, on the other hand, that yes, they did have breakages. In particular, let me know about your experience. Maybe someone reading the comments will draw their own conclusions from them. No problem if you want to. He wants to see results. Version E.